$5,000 a month? This has to be some kind of mistake. I stared at the invoice in my father's trembling hands, the HOA letterhead prominently displayed at the top. My parents' faces had gone pale, the worry lines deepening around their eyes as they struggled to comprehend how their monthly homeowners association dues had suddenly skyrocketed from $300 to an impossible $5,000. "We can't afford this, Michael," my mother whispered, her voice cracking. "We'll have to sell the house." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Little did Victoria Harrington and her power-hungry HOA board know that the quiet son who visited his parents every Sunday was the same Michael Thompson who had secretly purchased the entire Oakridge Estates development 3 months ago. I looked into my parents' frightened eyes and made a silent promise. This was war, and Victoria had no idea who she was messing with. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Thompson, had moved to Oakridge Estates in Riverside, California 5 years ago, seeking a peaceful retirement community with well-maintained grounds and friendly neighbors. For the first few years, everything was perfect. They'd made friends, joined the community garden club, and my father even volunteered to help with the neighborhood watch program. The HOA fees were reasonable at $300 per month, covering the community pool, landscaping, and occasional events. Then Victoria Harrington became the HOA president. Victoria was the embodiment of entitlement. Designer sunglasses permanently perched on her highlighted hair, always dressed as though heading to a country club luncheon, even when just collecting her mail. Within weeks of taking office, she began implementing what she called community improvement initiatives. These included restrictions on holiday decorations, mandatory lawn maintenance schedules, and inspections of exterior paint colors. Homeowners who didn't comply received warnings, then fines. My parents, ever the rule followers, adapted to Victoria's increasingly nitpicky demands. They repainted their door when the sunset coral was deemed too vibrant for community standards. They removed the bird feeder that had supposedly attracted undesirable wildlife. They even apologized to Victoria when their roses grew 2 inches taller than the permitted garden height. Throughout this time, I had been building my real estate investment portfolio, focusing on creating affordable housing communities with fair governance structures. When I learned that the developer of Oakridge Estates was quietly looking to sell the entire property, I saw an opportunity not just for investment, but to protect my parents and their neighbors from Victoria's regime. Using a holding company that couldn't be traced back to me, I purchased the development, including all common areas and the master authority over the HOA itself. I hadn't told my parents about the acquisition. I wanted to understand the neighborhood dynamics first and make strategic improvements before announcing any changes. But Victoria forced my hand with that outrageous invoice. "When did you receive this?" I asked, examining the official-looking document with its boldly printed due date just 2 weeks away. My father sighed. "It came yesterday. Eleanor wanted to handle it ourselves, but..." He trailed off, looking at the floor. "Victoria said it's a special assessment for luxury improvements," my mother explained, pulling out a glossy brochure. "They're planning to replace the community pool with a spa retreat, add a concierge service at the entrance gate, and renovate the clubhouse with imported marble." I flipped through the brochure, noting the lavish mock-ups of facilities that resembled a 5-star resort more than a retirement community. The final page explained that homeowners who couldn't afford the new fees could consider the Oakridge Estates buyback program, where the HOA would purchase their homes at fair market value. "Fair market value determined by whom?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Victoria's husband is a real estate appraiser," my mother said quietly. "He'll be conducting all the valuations." The scheme was now crystal clear. Force out fixed-income residents with astronomical fees, buy their properties at deflated prices, then resell them at a premium once the luxury amenities were installed. It was predatory, immoral, and, as I suspected after reviewing the HOA bylaws that night, completely illegal without a supermajority vote from all homeowners. The next morning, I drove to the community clubhouse where Victoria held her office hours, a monthly ritual where residents could bring concerns to her attention, though few ever did after witnessing her dismissive treatment of those who tried. The clubhouse was a modest building with comfortable furniture and large windows overlooking the community garden. Victoria sat at a desk near the entrance, scrutinizing documents through her reading glasses with a cup of untouched herbal tea beside her. When I approached, she didn't look up. "Office hours end at 11, she said without glancing away from her papers. "You'll need to make an appointment if you have a non-urgent matter." "I believe quintupling the HOA fees for elderly residents qualifies as urgent," I replied, placing my parents' invoice on top of her documents. Victoria finally looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to recognition. "Ah, you must be the Thompson boy. Your parents mentioned you visit on Sundays." She removed her glasses, hanging them from a beaded chain around her neck. "I understand this may seem like a significant increase, but progress requires investment. Oakridge Estates is elevating its status to compete with premium communities in the area. Without a proper vote from the homeowners, that violates the bylaws, Victoria." Her smile tightened. "We did have a vote. At last month's meeting, the board approved it unanimously. The board isn't sufficient for a special assessment of this magnitude. You need a 75% approval from all homeowners." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Are you a lawyer, Mr. Thompson?" "Just someone who reads contracts before signing them, or in this case, before watching my parents get forced out of their home by predatory fees." Victoria stood up, smoothing her immaculate blazer. "I understand your concern for your parents, but this is hardly predatory. We're offering fair buyout options for residents who prefer not to invest in our community's future. Perhaps your parents would be more comfortable in a simpler setting." The condescension in her voice made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. "My parents aren't going anywhere, and neither are the other residents you're trying to push out. I'll be attending the next HOA meeting to address this." "As a non-resident, you don't have speaking privileges at our meetings," Victoria said, with a smirk. "But you're welcome to observe from the back." As I turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and do remind your father that those hedges need to be trimmed back another 2 inches. I'd hate to have to issue another fine." I spent the next week investigating Victoria and the HOA board's activities. I discovered that 3 other elderly residents had already received the same astronomical bill, and 2 had already initiated the buyback program out of panic. The HOA had purchased their homes at nearly 30% below market value, and renovation crews were already preparing the properties for resale. Frank Miller, my parents' 82-year-old neighbor, invited me in for coffee when he saw me examining the construction activity at one of the recently acquired homes. "Same thing happened last year in Westfield Commons," Frank said, pouring me a cup of his too strong coffee. "Victoria's husband was on that HOA board too before they moved here. Half the seniors got pushed out with some special assessment for a golf course renovation that never happened." "And nobody fought back?" I asked. Frank shrugged. "Who has the energy or resources? Most folks just want peace in their golden years, not legal battles with neighbors. I met Sarah Chen, a corporate attorney who lived at the end of my parents' street, who had been compiling evidence of the HOA's questionable activities since Victoria took over. "They've been increasing their authority incrementally," Sarah explained, showing me a folder of documents. First, it was cosmetic rules, then structural modifications. Now they're essentially attempting a hostile takeover of private property. The problem is that most residents are too intimidated by Victoria to speak up. The Ramirez family shared how their request to install a wheelchair ramp for Mrs. Ramirez's mother had been denied 3 times for aesthetic inconsistency, despite being a clear violation of accessibility laws. By the time the HOA meeting approached, I had gathered enough evidence to challenge Victoria's leadership, but I decided to hold my strongest card, my ownership of the development, in reserve. First, I wanted to give Victoria an opportunity to back down gracefully. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse on a Wednesday evening. About 40 residents attended, mostly sitting in nervous silence as Victoria and her board members, Gerald Wilson, Pamela Kensington and Doug Fisher, reviewed agenda items with bureaucratic tedium. My parents sat near the front, occasionally glancing back at me with worried expressions. As promised, I was relegated to standing at the back of the room as a non-resident observer. When Victoria finally reached the agenda item labeled Capital Improvements Funding, she brightened visibly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Clicking to a slideshow of the proposed luxury renovations. As you all received in our informational packet, Oakridge Estates is undertaking an exciting transformation, she announced with rehearsed enthusiasm. Our special assessment will fund amenities that will not only enhance our daily lives, but significantly increase property values. An elderly woman in the second row timidly raised her hand. Victoria pointedly ignored her until several other residents began looking in the woman's direction. Yes, Mrs. Abernathy? Victoria finally acknowledged, with thinly veiled irritation. I'm on a fixed income, Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice quavering. I simply can't afford $5,000 a month. Will there be any financial assistance options? As outlined in the packet, residents who find the new fee structure challenging can participate in our generous buyback program, Victoria replied. We understand that some community members may prefer to relocate to more budget-friendly accommodations. The dismissive way she said budget-friendly caused a murmur of discomfort to spread through the room. I saw my chance and stepped forward. Excuse me, I called out clearly. I have a question about this special assessment. Victoria's head snapped in my direction. As previously explained, Mr. Thompson, non-residents don't have speaking privileges. Actually, I counted, according to your own bylaws, Section 4.3, family members representing homeowners have the same participation rights as residents during open forums. My parents have designated me as their representative for this meeting, and I held up a signed proxy form that Sarah Chen had helped me prepare. Victoria's expression soured as she realized I had outmaneuvered her procedurally. Very well, she said curtly. Your question. Thank you, I said, moving to the center of the room. My question is simple. When was the homeowner vote held for this special assessment? Because according to the bylaws, any fee increase exceeding 10% of the current rate requires approval from 75% of all homeowners, not just the board. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. The board was granted discretionary authority for capital improvements in the updated bylaws. If you had attended the annual meeting in April, you would know that. I have the minutes from that meeting, I replied, pulling out a document. No such authority was granted. In fact, there was no mention of bylaw changes at all. I turned to address the room. How many of you received notification about changes to the HOA's spending authority? The room remained silent, with residents exchanging confused glances. Victoria's face flushed. These are complex legal matters that don't need to be debated in an open forum. If you have concerns about procedural details, you can submit them in writing to the board for review at our next quarterly meeting. 3 months from now, after you've already collected thousands in unauthorized fees and forced more seniors to sell their homes at a loss, I challenged. I don't think so. Gerald Wilson, a thin man with a perpetual frown who served as the HOA treasurer, leaned toward his microphone. Mr. Thompson, while we appreciate your concern for your parents, the board has acted within its rights. The documentation you're referencing may be outdated. Then produce the current documentation, I demanded. Show us all the properly recorded vote that authorized this assessment. Victoria abruptly stood. This meeting is not a court of law, Mr. Thompson. The board has made its decision, and homeowners have been notified of their obligations. Those who choose not to comply with the new fee structure will face late penalties and eventual lien proceedings. Now, if there are no further questions directly related to the implementation of our improvement plan, we'll move to the next agenda item. Several residents began talking at once, their voices rising in concern. Victoria banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. In the commotion, Sarah Chen caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod, our signal that it was time to play my trump card. Before we move on, I said loudly, my voice cutting through the noise, there's something all Oakridge residents should know. Victoria slammed her gavel again. You are out of order, Mr. Thompson. Actually, I said calmly, I think you'll find that I'm perfectly in order. You see, 3 months ago, Oakridge Development Holdings purchased this entire property from the previous owner. And as the new owner, I've been reviewing the master HOA agreement, which gives the property owner oversight of all HOA actions, including the power to veto board decisions that violate either the bylaws or state law. The room fell into stunned silence. Victoria stared at me, her composure finally cracking. That's impossible, she stammered. The sale would have been announced to the board. The sale was properly registered with the county, I replied, pulling out the deed documents that I'd brought. And as the authorized representative of Oakridge Development Holdings, I'm officially vetoing the special assessment and calling for a full audit of the HOA's financial activities for the past 12 months. Victoria's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You can't just walk in here and— I can, I interrupted, and I am. Effective immediately, all improper fees are rescinded, and the 2 properties already purchased through the buyback program will be offered back to their original owners at the same price, with additional compensation for their inconvenience. The room erupted in applause and exclamations of relief. My parents sat in shock, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders as they processed what was happening. Gerald Wilson attempted to regain control. This is highly irregular. We'll need to consult our attorney before acknowledging any such authority. By all means, I agreed. In the meantime, I've prepared an interim HOA directive that freezes all current activities, returns fees to their previous level, and schedules a full community vote on any future projects. I handed copies to each board member. You'll find everything is legally binding and in accordance with both state law and the original master agreement. Victoria, finally finding her voice again, leaned into her microphone. This meeting is adjourned pending legal review, she announced, gathering her papers and storming toward the exit. One more thing, Victoria, I called after her. You might want to pack up your office. The property owner will be appointing an interim HOA manager tomorrow morning while we organize a legitimate board election. As Victoria disappeared through the door, the room filled with conversation and questions. I made my way to my parents, who were still sitting in stunned silence. You bought the whole neighborhood? My father asked incredulously. I smiled. Surprise! My mother shook her head in disbelief. Why didn't you tell us? I wanted to understand what was happening here first, I explained. I knew something was off with the HOA, but I had no idea how bad it had gotten until I saw that invoice. Frank Miller approached, grinning widely. "Well played, son. It's about time someone put Victoria in her place." For the next hour, I answered questions from residents, assured them that their homes were safe, and promised that the community would return to being the peaceful retirement haven they had originally chosen. Sarah Chen agreed to help establish a more transparent governance structure, and even Mrs. Abernathy volunteered to join a resident advisory committee. As the meeting broke up, I watched my parents chatting animatedly with their neighbors, the fear and tension melting from their faces. This was how retirement should be: dignified, secure, and free from predatory schemes disguised as community improvements. The next morning, I arrived at the clubhouse early to meet with a property management consultant I'd hired to help restructure the HOA. We were reviewing documents when Victoria walked in, stopping short when she saw me. "My attorney advised me that your claims may have merit," she said stiffly. "However, I want to be clear that the board acted in what we believed was the community's best interest. Forcing elderly residents from their homes for profit was in the community's best interest," I asked. Victoria's jaw tightened. "You're oversimplifying a complex growth strategy." "Call it whatever you want," I replied. "But it ends today. Your resignation letter is on the desk. I suggest you sign it and leave with whatever dignity you have left." She glared at me for a long moment before marching to the desk, scribbling her signature on the prepared letter and walking out without another word. Over the next month, we restructured the HOA completely. The monthly fees returned to their original $300 with a transparent budgeting process that required resident approval for any increases. The two homeowners who had sold under duress were able to repurchase their properties, and a new board was elected with term limits and clear accountability measures. As for Victoria and her supporters, they listed their homes for sale within weeks. I heard through local real estate channels that they were looking at properties in a gated community on the other side of town, hopefully one with stronger ethical oversight than they had demonstrated. 6 months later, Oakridge Estates had transformed back into the peaceful retirement community my parents had originally chosen. The garden club was thriving, community events were well attended, and residents walked the neighborhood streets without fear of arbitrary fines or violations. My parents insisted on hosting a community barbecue to celebrate the changes. As I watched my father grilling burgers while chatting with Frank Miller about their shared military service, and my mother arranging flower centerpieces with Mrs. Abernathy, I knew that stepping in had been worth every effort. Sarah Chen joined me at the dessert table, passing me a plate of my mother's famous apple pie. "You know," she said, "most people who acquire property developments do it to make money, not to save their parents from HOA tyrants." I laughed. It turned out to be a surprisingly good investment anyway. Property values have actually increased since word got out about the new management. Justice and profit, Sarah mused, a rare combination. As the sun set over Oakridge Estates, I watched the residents, my neighbors now, since I'd purchased a small property of my own within the development, enjoying each other's company without the cloud of fear that Victoria had created. Sometimes the most satisfying victories aren't just about winning, they're about restoring what should never have been taken away in the first place: dignity, security, and peace of mind for those who deserve it most. 1 year after the Oakridge Estates transformation, I sat on my parents' patio, watching the quarterly community potluck unfold across their backyard. Children from visiting families played tag between garden beds, while seniors chatted in comfortable lawn chairs, sharing stories and laughter. It was exactly the kind of intergenerational neighborhood gathering that had become routine since Victoria's departure. My mother emerged from the kitchen with a fresh pitcher of lemonade. "This is what community should feel like," she said, smiling as she watched Mrs. Ramirez's grandchildren helping Frank Miller set up his chessboard. "I can't believe we almost lost this." The new HOA structure had proven remarkably effective. Monthly meetings were now well attended, with decisions made transparently and with genuine resident input. The reasonable $300 monthly fees went toward thoughtful improvements like expanded garden spaces, a small library corner in the clubhouse, and wheelchair-accessible pathways throughout the common areas. Sarah Chen, who had been elected as the new HOA president, approached us with a plate of brownies. "Your investment is paying off," she said, nodding toward a cluster of residents discussing plans for the fall festival. Not just financially. She was right. The community had blossomed once freed from Victoria's reign. But more importantly, my parents and their neighbors had reclaimed their sense of ownership and belonging. They weren't just living in houses, they were building a true community. As the evening wound down and residents began heading home, I helped my father fold up the extra chairs. "I got a call from Westfield Commons yesterday," he mentioned casually. My ears perked up. Westfield was the previous neighborhood where Victoria and her husband had orchestrated a similar scheme before moving to Oakridge. "Oh, what about?" "Seems word has spread about what happened here," my father explained. "Their HOA is dealing with the same issue. Astronomical fee increases, pressure to sell to board members. They wanted to know how we handled it." I paused, chair in hand. "What did you tell them?" My father smiled. "I told them to look carefully at who actually owns their development. Sometimes the real power isn't with the people making the most noise." That conversation planted a seed. The next morning, I called my business partner to research Westfield Commons. Sure enough, their development was owned by a corporate entity connected to Victoria's husband, Gerald Wilson, and another familiar name, Pamela Kensington, from our former board. They had simply moved their operation to a new location, targeting another community of vulnerable seniors. The pattern was identical: gain control of the HOA board, implement impossible fees, force panicked residents to sell at losses, then flip the properties for substantial profits. I spent the next weeks gathering information, connecting with Westfield residents, and documenting the pattern of predatory behavior. Rather than confronting Victoria and her associates directly, I took my findings to the district attorney's office, presenting evidence of what appeared to be organized real estate fraud targeting elderly homeowners across multiple communities. The investigation moved quietly at first. Search warrants were executed, records seized, interviews conducted with former homeowners who had been pressured to sell. Within 3 months, the district attorney had enough evidence to file charges against Victoria, her husband, and 3 other associates for conspiracy, elder abuse, and real estate fraud. The morning of their arraignment, I arrived at the courthouse to find a small crowd gathered outside, former residents from both Oakridge and Westfield, many holding handmade signs with messages like "Homes not commodities" and "Seniors deserve security." My parents stood among them, proud and determined to see justice through to its conclusion. As Victoria and her co-defendants were escorted into the building, a reporter approached me for comment. At first, I hesitated. This wasn't about personal vindication, but about protecting vulnerable communities. Yet I realized my story might help others recognize similar schemes before they took root. What we uncovered wasn't just one HOA gone rogue, I explained. It was a systematic effort to exploit seniors and housing regulations for profit. Today shows that communities can fight back when they stand together. The case made headlines across the state, prompting investigations into several other developments with suspicious patterns of HOA behavior. Regulatory reforms were proposed. to increase oversight of homeowners associations and strengthen protections for elderly residents against predatory housing practices. 6 months later, Victoria and her associates accepted a plea deal that included restitution to former homeowners, significant fines, and probation terms that permanently barred them from serving on any HOA board or working in real estate transactions. The evening after the sentencing, I found myself back at my parents' house for our usual Sunday dinner. The mood was reflective as we discussed the outcome of the case and the changes it had sparked across similar communities. "You know what I keep thinking about?" my father said as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "That invoice. If they hadn't gotten so greedy with that $5,000 fee, we might never have uncovered what they were doing." My mother nodded. Sometimes people reveal who they truly are when they think they're untouchable. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had unfolded from that single outrageous invoice. What had begun as a simple defense of my parents had evolved into a larger mission to protect vulnerable homeowners and reform a system that enabled exploitation. The most powerful realization wasn't that I had used my resources to fight back against Victoria and her scheme. It was understanding that sustainable communities are built on something no predatory investor can ever fake or steal: genuine care for one's neighbors, transparency in governance, and the courage to stand together against exploitation. I hadn't set out to become an advocate for housing justice or HOA reform. I had simply wanted to protect my parents from being pushed out of their home. But sometimes the most important battles find us when we least expect them, and the most meaningful victories extend far beyond our original goals. Today, Oakridge Estates stands as a model for what resident-centered community governance can achieve. The gardens are flourishing, the common spaces are filled with activity, and most importantly, the residents feel secure in their homes and empowered in their community. Victoria's scheme had backfired in the most profound way possible. In her quest to turn housing into a commodity, she had inadvertently strengthened the very concept of community she had tried to exploit. And in her attempt to force out vulnerable residents for profit, she had triggered reforms that would protect countless others from similar schemes. As for my parents, they now lead the Community Garden Committee, hosting seasonal workshops that bring together residents of all ages. My father jokes that retirement has never been so busy, but I can see in his eyes that he wouldn't have it any other way. This is their home, their community, their safe harbor for their golden years, exactly as it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.